May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we have the perfect guest to help us kick it off. Dr. Carla Chugani is a clinical scientist, therapist, and mental health expert who specializes in dialectical behavioral therapy. She's opening up about the various benefits of DBT, plus she's offering advice to anyone seeking help. This is Advocate Now. Well, Dr. Chugani, thank you so much for being here. And you use something called DBT while treating patients, which stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. Can you explain what that is and how it can be beneficial?
Absolutely. So DBT is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy that incorporates some dialectical philosophy as well as elements of mindfulness. And it's a pretty time-intensive treatment, right? So there is that weekly one-to-one individual therapy, but there's also weekly group skills training. Therapists are typically available to patients between sessions for phone coaching. And then therapists also participate in a weekly team consultation meeting. And so it's a pretty intensive treatment that was really designed to treat a population of people with more intense needs. So borderline personality disorder, chronic suicidality, things like that.
And can you give us a few examples of some of the skills that patients might develop through the use of DBT?
Absolutely. So DBT skills focus on 4 core areas. So mindfulness skills, which are sort of the foundation of everything. We have emotion regulation skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills, and distress tolerance skills. It's a lot of skills, but just to give you an example of one that is sort of my personal favorite, there's a skill that's part of our distress tolerance module that's called radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is really complete and total acceptance of reality, just as it is in the moment.
And you primarily work with college students. How can DBT be useful for young adults specifically?
So I think DBT is a phenomenal treatment for young adults who are struggling with suicidality as well as pervasive dysregulation. But what I love about the DBT skills in particular is that these are skills for coping. They are skills for self-regulating and advocating for yourself and functioning effectively in the world. And so I remember when I was doing DBT with college students more than 10 years ago now, I would sit with these young people who are suffering and just think to myself, why are we waiting so long to teach people these skills, right? Learning how to manage your mental health is part of health. And we ought to be doing this in a more health promotion and preventative way rather than only doing it as remediation.
And in working with those college students, have you found that many of them are dealing with mental illnesses that have been undiagnosed?
In some cases, college is an interesting time for mental health. You're going through a lot of developmental milestones and firsts. You're transitioning into adulthood. You may be transitioning out of your home of residence. And your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet. So you don't have as much impulse control as somebody who's maybe a little bit older. But that 18 to 24 range is also when a lot of major mental illnesses will present for the first time. So they might come to college never really having had any problems with their mental health, and then it just begins.
Yeah, and especially with young adults, there's an enormous amount of pressure and comparison at that age. You also, though, prioritize underserved communities like the disabled and LGBTQ plus youth. Why is that important to you?
Well, I identify as queer myself. I have invisible disabilities. And What I've found is that having culturally competent care by a provider who understands the importance of bringing cultural humility into treatment makes a huge difference, right? We don't want to have to educate people so that they can treat us. We want to just be seen for who we are, understood for who we are, and to be treated with really high quality evidence-based care.
And you have talked about how learning to be a DBT therapist has allowed you to help people who are suffering in ways that you've suffered. Was that a catalyst in starting your career path to begin with?
Absolutely. I actually went to college for opera performance, and I never had mental health problems that I can recall during high school. And I had really severe mental illness when I was in college. I was chronically suicidal. It's honestly the worst pain I've ever experienced in my entire life. And sometimes when I'm struggling now, I actually look back on that pain and think to myself, you survived that, so you can probably survive this. And I was very fortunate. My parents are in the medical field, and they were able to find me really high quality treatment. They were able to pay for my treatment, and I got better. But there was a time in my life when I didn't know if I was going to really even be a functioning member of society, much less be a person with a doctorate and a executive title and any of those kinds of things. And so when I got better, I thought to myself that I need to give back, right? I need to go back and help people like me.
And now you do focus heavily on suicide prevention and early intervention, right? Probably because of the experience that you had.
Yeah, I started my career really focused on doing clinical work with highly suicidal young people, and I still love that work. And I really want to reach upstream. I want to reach people before the stress turns into distress and then chronic distress, right? So a lot of the work that I do now is actually figuring out how to adapt some of these evidence-based practices like DBT, the DBT skills, for upstream applications so that students who are doing well can maintain their wellness, right? Because it's hard to maintain your wellness, especially when you're just going through the ups and downs of life. And then for students who are just starting to struggle, to give them the tools and the knowledge and the motivation that they need to take care of themselves so that maybe that struggle doesn't progress so far.
For those who are suffering silently right now, any words of advice on taking that first step and getting help?
Yeah, I would say talk to someone, right? Talk to somebody, tell somebody that you trust how you're feeling, even if they're not in the mental health field, that's okay. If it's somebody who you trust and supports you, ask them to help you find some help.
Over 40 million people struggle with mental health in the US, but unfortunately, there is still a stigma surrounding mental illness. What do you think needs to be done to erase that stigma?
Well, I think a big part of it is that we need to start earlier, right? So just like we educate children in schools about their physical health, we need to educate them about their mental health. We need to teach them the basics of how their minds work, how emotion regulation works, right? How do communication skills work? What does a healthy relationship look like? And what might the impact be on you and your mental health when you get into an unhealthy relationship? Right. And I think the more it just becomes part of everybody's shared language and shared knowledge that this is something that's important to know about. It's something that is, sort of built into our educational system and prioritized through policy, through legislation, both for young people, but really out throughout the lifespan, right? So securing that funding and protected resources so that people can actually access high quality, culturally competent care when they need it, regardless of their ability to pay for it, right? If we prioritize it as a society, then we will destigmatize it.
Absolutely. Dr. Chugani, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
I'm Sonia Baghdady. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com.